Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is Brian Carroll, aka the Kickin' Chicken, and we're coming to you today from Shooter's Billiards in Southington, Connecticut, one of the best old school style pool rooms you'll ever see. First, I would like to offer a big thank you to Shooter's room owner, Sal Conti, for hosting this, as well as his shared interest in preserving some of pool's very interesting and colorful history. I will assure everyone that today's guest has not only had a front row seat to a fair amount of it, but has in fact become part of pool's colorful history himself. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome legendary road hustler and all-around good guy, Mr. Bobby Hunt. Interesting, one of the many conflicts within you is you had no problem with students. To do a hustle on that.
Yeah, that was Eddie. Eddie and I were in Clemson, South Carolina. We went by Clemson University, and I remember they had a place called Rio Lobo's Bar. So Eddie got me a T-shirt that said Rio Lobo's on. We bought it from the bar, and I think it said whatever town it was. And he got me a pair of clear glasses, and somehow he found a textbook, and he was sharp. So we went into the student union, because I was probably 27, but I could have passed for 17 or 18. And we went into student union, and I won $2,600 from these kids in college. Once again, I blame that on Eddie. Eddie O'Connor was a great pool hustler, but he wound up doing very well in life. He wound up buying antique pool tables, and he would rent them to the movie companies. He sold tables with Paul Newman and Tom Cruise, but he was always a hustler. I went to Eddie's wedding, and Eddie, this is later on, this is 10, 15 years ago. Can't remember exactly when it was. And everybody at the wedding had money except me. I was the only pool player invited to this wedding. And Eddie's, he's working the whole room, and he came over and whispered in my ear. And by this time, Eddie was very well off financially. He had done well buying and selling tables. And he whispered in my ear, "I'd give it all up, Bob, in a minute to go back on the road." It was so much fun being road players back in the 70s and 80s. Every town had someone who thought they could play. Every town had pool rooms, and the overhead was so cheap. In fact, motels and stuff were cheap back then. You could go to a motel. They didn't ask for identification yet, and you didn't need a credit card, and you didn't have to pay till you were leaving town. How can they expect to get paid? So we beat every motel we could, for weeks on end. And I have a story about a pool player, I won't mention his name, about beating a motel. And I don't remember where this was. I think it was around Memphis, but I'm not sure. It's been so long. Back then, motels, you used to be able to open the windows to get air in your room, which they don't do that anymore. So you'd throw your luggage out the window, then you'd leave through the exit, and you wouldn't pay the place. So a friend of mine, Michael and I coming out, and there's another entrance. We look over, and two well-known pool players. One of them is passed away, and he's one of my oldest friends in the pool world. They're coming out one of the other exits, and he's carrying the TV. He robbed the room. But pool players,
wasn't enough that they beat the bill.
They beat the bill, and then you took the TV because you can't do that stuff anymore. But what did they expect? They didn't ask us for identification.
Almost as if the hotels were asking for it.
Yeah, it was their own fault. Yes.
So at some point you had a small pool room or an interest in I guess what was it, like half of a bowling alley and part of it was pool room?
I leased the pool room from the bowling alley in Saybrook.
Yeah.
It was just 6 tables, but I think it made me into a pool player because I was sitting there 12 hours a day. All my friends refused to pay table time, so we only lasted about 4 years, and my friend Bert was my partner.
Oh, right.
And he was my first road partner before. He was the first person to have faith in me, that thought I could play pretty well, and Bert always had a good job, so he was my first partner.
You dragged him into the treachery of hustling also, didn't you?
Yeah, I dragged him. Yeah, he wasn't kicking and screaming. He loved it. He just didn't play like me. He was in Texas one time. He got beat for $35. He flew me down to get his money back. He had he got so upset people would beat him, but he thought he could play like me. and he's still one of my best friends.
Did he hustle with you over at the pool room in Sanford?
Well, he couldn't beat anybody. He'd take a piece of what I did, but yeah. There was one story with Bert that it happened in the bowling alley. I remember I had 6 tables in there, and there was a lot of gambling. A guy who worked for the bowling alley, and I think his name was Wayne, he wasn't very smart. He was kind of slow. And he would gamble and pool a little bit, but I could play, and I was already too good. But he could bowl pretty good, too. So he hit a scratch-off ticket at the lottery for $5,000. Back then, it took about 3 weeks to get the money. So I offered him $500 for that ticket in cash, and he was going for it. The guy who owned the bowling alley put a stop to it. Wouldn't let me take advantage of him because he was not sharp. So anyhow, Wayne gets his money. Now, we've gone from playing $2 or $3 pool. Now that Wayne has money, I said, well, we could do some bowling action. And I could bowl a little bit. I wasn't very good, but I could get the ball going straight. So Bert and I forgot how much we were playing for now, but Bert went down into the alleys, into the traps. I can't think what they call it. Where
The pit behind
but
the
pit,
fence?
yeah, the pits.
Yeah.
Okay. And Bert could look out and see who's bowling. So Wayne would bowl, and he was pretty good. But then when it was my turn, Bert had a stick, and we're knocking all the pins down. But the best one was, I looked down the alley, and I see Bert's head looking out to see who's bowling. Thank God Wayne didn't see it. But we got a small piece of that $5,000. But the owner of the bowling alley once again stopped me.
Back to one of your most favorite pool buddies, Larry Liscotti. Did he ever play in disguise? Did you give himself an edge?
Well,
that
most
you're
people
aware?
back then had something they would do. But my favorite of Larry, it was in Connecticut. And if I recall, it was a pool room either connected to the bowling alley or next to a bowling alley. But I'd heard about a guy playing straight pool. So I went up there looking to play some. And I knew the guy a little bit. So I go in there to play, and the guy doesn't want to play, and someone had just beat him for all his money. He was telling me the week before, a guy came in with long, dark brown hair. The guy comes in looking to gamble and play straight pool. So he starts playing straight pool with this guy with the long hair. Well, back then, we didn't have air conditioning in all the places we played pool, so it would get hot and sweaty. He said he looked over at the guy the guy moved the wig aside and wiped his forehead off to sweat. It was Larry Liscotti. He was playing with a wig on, and so this guy didn't want to play me. Larry busted him, but
That's great.
yeah. But there was so many players ran around back then dressed as painters, or all you had to do was shake their hand. Immediately they weren't working for a living.
I heard Larry can play pretty good with a bridge, too.
Oh,
Not the regular pool bridge.
Yes. One time, more than once, twice that I know of, I'm betting on Larry. And Larry, he was a champion. Anytime he played, I'd still be betting on him if he was still with us. So Larry was playing, we were in Chicago Billiards. He's playing straight pool, which back in those days, I think Larry's best game was a world champion, straight pool. He was a monster. But he didn't get to play very often because it wasn't a big gambling game as the years went by. So Larry's playing a guy, and he's safe. So he goes over to look at the rack real closely, and he made sure he stood between the rack and his opponent. And as he did, he bends his head over to see if the balls are dead and moves the ball with his nose. So now the shot went. And I had a piece of that. But yeah, I thought the world of Larry. I tell you one thing, Larry could shark me every time we played. We must have gambled each other 50 times, maybe more. I mean, he beat me more than I beat him. But he knew every shark and move that would get me. He was hilarious.
Well, give us a couple of examples.
Well,
How did Shark you?
My favorite one, Larry and I are playing in a tournament, excuse me, in Worcester, Massachusetts. And we're down to there's just 3 or 4 of us left in the tournament. So I'm playing Larry on table 1. And to our right is a nice looking young lady who's watching. But I knew she was watching the next table over because there was a guy she was with, and I'd been looking at her all day, so I knew she was looking at them. So she's sitting on one side of our table, And as we're playing, I'm pulling ahead of Larry, 3-1, 4-1, something. I'm ahead of him. I don't know what the score was. Well, I get way ahead now, like 6-1. I was way ahead of Larry, 6-2, I think it was. As I'm getting ready to shoot, he comes over to me. He says, Bob. I said, what, Larry? Because I know something's coming whenever you use that voice, Bob. I said, what, Larry? He said, see that girl, she can't keep her eyes off you. I said, Larry, I know she's not looking at me. Because I've been looking at her. She's watching her boyfriend or whatever he is. He goes, no, she can't. I said, Larry, I know what he's doing. He's sharking me. I said, go sit down. Now, we get to the hill. I get to the hill first. And I don't remember if it was, doesn't matter what it was, but I was to the hill first. But I was only 1 or 2 games ahead of him. Because if I was off at all, the man's going to rob me. And he's making his comeback. But this was my favorite one. I'm on the hill, 9-ball, my final shot to win the match. I get ready to shoot, and Larry goes, Bob. I said, what, Larry? He goes, the girl wants to meet you. He stops me in the middle of my shot. He introduces me to this girl. I said, my God, this guy's brilliant. And he was great. He was a great player. He knew every move there was in pool. And I miss him.
So recently, you and I were involved in a pretty big action match. We weren't playing. We were on the rail, involved in the betting side of it, and a large amount of money went missing. And we luckily were able to get that solved, and the repercussions were only mild, I think. But we did catch what happened there, and it leads me to my next question. So in your travels, you've seen it all, as they say. What are some of the more memorable situations that you've witnessed or knew about where people came up short or dumped or something like that?
Well, first of all, let me get back to the guy who took the up money that night.
Jesus,
it was $1,000.
Yeah.
He took the money, and thankfully, guy Mike 2.0 solved it by making a guy empty his pockets. We found there goes the $1,000 that was disappeared. He said he didn't take it, but it's in his pocket. If that had been in the 70s, even the 80s, he might not have been killed, but he would have been hurt badly. If he'd have done that in Milford Rec with those old timers that I played around, they would have beat him right there in the pool room. Nowadays, I don't see that happening as much. Now people call the police for everything. Some of the other things I've heard of, like dumping, and I heard we were in one of the Carolinas, a guy had dumped a backer. They caught him in his motel room, held him down, and stuck a soldering iron up his butt. That was one of the penalties for dumping. I've seen pool players where they get their hands broken. I don't remember anyone ever dying, but you got hurt in my era. I remember you might get whacked if you just said something wrong in my generation. One time I was holding the up money for these two gangsters. I'm holding the up money, and I made a mistake. I handed it to the wrong person. And one of the two people, the one who should have got the money, he was 88 years old and came at me with his cue in the air to hit me. And I knew I was wrong, and I was willing to take the hit. He didn't do it, but he could have, and I would have understood. You didn't break rules back then. Yeah, I don't see that.
They didn't go for stepping out of line too well. They didn't suffer that.
This same guy who we're talking about, his name was Bo, and he ran the numbers in New Haven for 75 years. So he always had plenty of money. In fact, when he was 88, he and his buddy beat me for $4,000 one day. I made a bad game, and they beat me pretty good on that. But I got a couple of stories with Bo I think are funny. Bo would cheat, lie, steal. He was brutal. Miserable man. But I'll tell you, he was 92, and he was still making games he could win at sometimes. By 94, he was just a total sucker. But Bo was playing one time on the front table, and Bo would play in one pocket. He would not hesitate to steal a ball from you. Well, after the end of the rack, they go to rack the balls up. There's a ball missing. They can't find it. They look underneath in the tracks. It was still in Bo's pocket. When he stole it, he put it in his pocket and forgot. But that leads me to another story of Bo, which is one of my favorites. It'll take a minute to tell it. There was a player out of New York. Actually, I think he was from Bridgeport, but they called him Shorty Brown. And he was, couldn't have been more than 5'2", a little black man. He was playing my friend Paulie, Paulie, one pocket. Now, I don't remember what the bet was, but Bo is betting on Paulie on the game. I got to remember how it worked. Shorty Brown had scratched and owed a ball. So when he made a ball, he didn't spot it, and in one pocket, you're supposed to spot it as soon as you make it. Well, Bo is betting on Paulie. Now, he's not in the game, so he can't say anything. Even though it's his money's in the game, he can't say anything. So he writes a little note, slips it to Paulie, and I never saw the note, but it was something along the lines of, Shorty owes you a ball, I assume. Well, he hands the note to Paulie. Paulie can't read without his glasses. He hands it to Shorty to read him the note. Well, Shorty's 5 foot tall. Bo is about 5'2", and one of them's 85, and the other one's like 75. They come at each other with pool cues, and the whole place is howling in laughter as they're trying to have a sword fight with these pool cues. But
Just another fun day at the pool hall, right?
that's what I think I loved about pool. Every day something happened that was fun.
What, in your opinion, would be the best pool hall you've ever been in?
Oh, I don't know about the best. There were so many good ones. Chelmsford had a great room. There was one in downtown New Haven that was as nice as any I've ever. It was called a Player's Choice. That was really nice. They didn't have a parking lot though, so they couldn't last. It's easy to remember the bad ones.
So I was going to ask you next. What's the worst?
The worst pool I ever went to was in Middletown, Connecticut. It was called Capitol Billiards. You had to walk down this alley. It didn't have any lights, and it was dark. And this room was a dump. In fact, in the back of the bathroom, there was a toilet on the floor. It had like a piece of plywood, like leaning on an angle, and you'd crawl on behind it and use the urinal. You never saw a woman in there. It was just this. They had 2 dogs that would run around all the time. I was playing Kitty Wellman when we were first starting out, early 70s. And this pool room, everybody in there was playing for 10 cents a game. Well, Kenny and I were playing $30 a rack, which was a pretty good bet in 73 at 9-ball. And while we're playing, I go to shoot a ball, and one of the dogs comes over and starts humping my leg, jumping up and down on me. I got rid of him. But then later on in that same match, Kenny's getting ready to shoot a 9-ball. Just as he hits it, the dog jumped on him for some reason. Kenny's stick went straight into the rail, and it bent like a C. We kind of quit after that game, and we became friendly real quickly because we were both young and looking to play, and we both wanted to go places, so it worked out nicely for us.
Who are some of the best lady players that you've run across?
Jeannie Belucas might be the best I saw. I mean, I know nowadays the girls are playing better, but Jeannie Belucas was great, you know. And there was a girl out of Detroit named Lori Champeau. She broke, her whole body came off the ground. She might have been the best, at that time, best 9-ball player for the women, you know. But Jeannie Belucas she was really, really good.
Jean could compete with the guys probably, right?
She did beat a few.
Yeah.
Myself included. And I remember one time she beat Cicero Murphy, Earl Herring, and myself back to back. And we all played pretty good. They were better than I was. And she beat all 3 of us. Took Mizrak to stop her.
Do I recall hearing that she was looking to take a swipe at Tommy Jr., our friend Tommy Seminaro?
No, that
what happened there?
That was Billy Billing, if I recall.
Oh, okay.
Tommy and I walked into a pool room. It was in West End Billiards in New Jersey. And she was hitting balls not even anywhere near us. And Tommy asked me who it was, and I said, that's Billy Billing. She's a woman pro. Tommy was about 19, and out of nowhere, he yells out, "No woman in the world can beat me." Well, this woman came running over, screaming at him, "Who do you think you are? You think you're Mike Siegel? I'll play you some." So they decide they're going to play for $40 a set. She walked away. Tommy looked at me like a beaten little boy. He goes, "Bob, can I beat her?" I said, "Yeah, you can beat her, Tom." But Tommy was really funny. He was fun to hang around with.
Well, that leads me to my next thought is, as far as colorful players in pool, It seems like there used to be a lot more of them back in the old days. Now it's gotten maybe a little bit vanilla. There's still some characters, but the old school seems like there was a lot more of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think so. I think now, I mean, Europeans are great players, but there's not a lot of, they're all the same. There's not a lot of emotion. And I think the difference is now, compared to American players, the Europeans and the Chinese, they treat pool like it's a job and a business. We treated it like it was a game we could make money at. So we would have fun, laughing and joking, and making games. Keith McCready was a character. Larry Liscotti was a character. You don't really see many like that anymore. Alex Pagulayan seems to still be like that, but it's more, and I understand they're making a living now. It's more business, it seems like. But I think they were characters.
So Bob, I know that you and Kenny Wellman and maybe Tommy also, you met up with a guy or ran into a guy down, was it in New York, that they call Flipper? Can you tell us about that?
That was quite an experience, and this man was a character too. And people won't believe this unless they had ever seen this man play. He had hands on his elbows. He didn't have any lower arms, but he had small hands hanging off his elbows. He played one pocket. We go in there, Tommy and I, Bruce and Kenny, and we see this guy looking to play one pocket 50 a game. Well, I think we're stealing. In fact, it looks so easy, I didn't even want to play. Tommy and I went for a walk around the corner to the package store. And so Kenny starts playing this guy with no arms. We think we're stealing. Well, the guy could play a little bit. And Kenny was too busy talking to the girl on the table next to us, telling her what a pool hustler he is and how good he is. This guy broke us. He had no arms, and they called him Flipper. And I know you researched it, and the guy really exists.
We found him. I think did he work at one of the airports?
Oh, I forgot now.
Newark Airport, something. Yeah,
But
we did. We found
he
out
could
who
play.
was.
He played on a super fast table, so you didn't need a stroke. And he played one pocket, and he beat us.
Bob, a while back, you and I were noodling around playing some 9-ball, and I was going to get my break cue. And when I came back to the table, I can hit them pretty hard. And I laid into this one, hit it hard as I could, and I don't think a single ball hit a rail. And we had a pretty big laugh. Obviously, you'd slugged me pretty good, but I really couldn't tell until I hit them. And so when we're laughing about it, you told me a story I'd like you to share. You had a similar experience with world champion Nick Varner. Why don't you share that with us?
Well, Nicky was in Connecticut. I had played him a couple times before, so we knew each other. So we played 9-ball in New London one day, and I don't remember what the score was, but he had run a couple racks, so I had to stop that. So I gave him a slug rack, and he hit it hard, and the balls barely even opened up. And he looked at me with that southern accent. Oh, I thought I hit him pretty good. I felt so bad I re-racked and gave him a good rack. But sometimes you had to. If a guy's breaking and making a ball, you had to put a stop to it.
Bob, in your opinion, who would you say was the best straight pool player of all time?
Steve Miserak, that I ever saw. He was great.
And how about best one-pocket player?
I don't know who the best one-pocket player would have been, but my favorite was Jack Cooney. He was the best pool hustler probably of our era, our generation.
What was it about him that made him the
He was
best
smarter
pool
than all the rest of us. He knew how to hustle. He could lay a spread down. He'd blow 3,000 or 4,000. People were convinced he couldn't play a lick, and he was great. And he did it really well. And I don't know. I remember watching him play Richie Richardson when he was about 65, and Richie had just won the U.S. Open. He was a young man, and they played for 19 hours, and they broke even. And, that's pretty strong.
Where was Jack Cooney out of? I've certainly heard of him. Where?
San Francisco. But he wouldn't have played tournaments, so most people wouldn't know who he is except pool players. They all know who he was.
And what about 9-ball?
Toby Sweet. He was the best push-out 9-ball player I've ever seen. To this day, he's my favorite. he was the first real pool player I ever played for money. And I remember watching him. He was in Connecticut, and he had been playing a local player, Gabe the mailman, played him for 2 full nights. And he was giving, if I recall, he was giving him the 8. And this was like our local top player. Toby gives him the 8. On the 3rd night, Toby had finally busted him. And Gabe was finished. But I sat there for 3 nights just watching Toby play. And if I knew he was playing tonight somewheres, I'd probably go watch him again. The way he handled the cue ball, he was the first player I ever saw who broke the balls, controlled the break. You know, we were just hitting hard. He controlled everything. He was great. After the 3rd day, after he beat Gabe, Paulie, the man who, you know, helped me a lot in those early days, got Toby to give me the 7 ball, and these guys backed me against him, and I wound up winning that night. So we made a point. We'll play again tomorrow night with a 7 ball. So the next night, I'm waiting. He comes. Everybody's in place. Toby comes in, and first thing I said was, "You don't have to spot me. I'll play you even." All my backers disappeared, and Toby busted me. And to this day, he's the best I've ever seen at push-out 9 ball. You know, it was just great.
And I watched an interview that Max Eberle did with Bill Stroud a while back, and he said the same thing. Without hesitation, he said the best 9-ball player he ever saw was Toby Sweet and push-out 9-ball.
Toby, I remember going, this happened to me twice, 2 different places. I was down in the Carolinas one time going, and back then, every town had a pool room. At least one pool room. In some towns, the bigger towns, would have a black pool room and a white pool room. I mean, and everybody thought they could play back then. And everything was so cheap, people had extra money. But I went, and the same thing happened in Baltimore. I go to all these spots, and they're telling me Toby Sweet had just come through. He spotted everybody, whatever they asked for, and busted them. And I couldn't give as much as Toby. You know, Toby's great. So I saw Toby a couple of years later, and we were talking about it. And I said, "Geez, Toby, you ruined it for us." Because, yeah, I've been accused of that before. He was just a great player.
For anybody unfamiliar with Toby Sweet, if you might have seen him around, he always had bell bottoms and a toothpick, real skinny guy.
And he still has the bell bottoms. And
yeah, right.
It's 19 years. But he's when I first met him, he was riding around in a Jaguar. I mean, he was what I wanted to be as a pool player. He never said a word when he played. He never whined and complained. He just played great.
Took care of biz.
He was a great player.
What kind of equipment did you prefer to play with? What was your cue of choice?
Well, back then I had this Balabush guy, I still have, that I used for years, and then I got to know Gus Zambotti, so I would use his cues in the later years because, I change once in a while. But Gus made a great stick, and so did George.
You got a difficult time hanging on to some of these cues, is that right?
Well, back then, every time you'd go broke, you'd lose your cue too. I don't see that anymore. But if we got beat back then, the cue was the first thing to go. But I think you're remembering. I picked up a Gus Zambotti. Gus made a cue for me. Told me I could pick it up tomorrow morning at whatever time. Well, that night I'm in Connecticut, and Gus lived in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. So The Hustler was on TV. Well, I watched The Hustler. It was over at 2 in the morning. Well, I can't go to sleep now. I got to be in Philadelphia to get my stick in the morning. So a friend of mine was there. We drive down to Gus's house. I park in his driveway. And his wife gets up like 7 in the morning, sees me sleeping in the car. Comes out and wakes me up, brings me in, and Gus is there. And he gives me my brand new cue. And I'm ecstatic, Every stick I had looked exactly the same, but I'd sell them and I'd have to get another one. So we're driving back to Connecticut. Then there was a pool room in Bridgeport. And it was a man named Gil Black owned it. And it was an after-hours room. But he'd be open in the morning sometimes from the night before cleaning up because it opened at midnight. So I'm coming through Bridgeport thinking, well, I didn't want to wait till I want to play with this stick. So let's stop in, My friend Dave and I will stop in, I stop in, and he had a phony tight table. You couldn't get a piece of chalk past the ball. So I'm better than Gil at this time, but I was giving him the 7 on normal tables. Well, I tried to give him a 7 on that tight table with my brand new cue. At noon, when I left there, I had to call Gus. I lost his cue. I had it for 5 hours. I lost it gambling. And I said, Gus, and he started laughing. He said, I'll make you another one. But I had it 5 hours.
That should be a record, 5 hours.
That was
right?
pretty quick.
For you, anyway, yeah.
That was pretty quick.
Now, isn't it true that you special ordered a Tim Scruggs cue with veneers to match your wife Colleen's eyes?
Yes, I did that. And she still isn't happy about that. She had blue-gray eyes. So I remember one day looking at her eyes thinking, boy, those would make some nice-looking veneers, you know? So I called Timmy Scruggs up and I said, Timmy, I'd like a cue and, you know, just 4 ebony point steel joint and blue, white, and gray veneers. I thought that'd look really nice together. And he said, oh, it would. So he sent me the cue. And back then, Timmy would only charge me half price for cues, so I got it for $500. And I got it like on a Monday. On Friday, this Navy guy came in the pool room and offered me $1,000 for the cue. So I had to take the $1,000. Well, Colleen is still upset, and it's been 20 years, because she said it was her cue. I said, I said, ask any pool player what they would have done. Every pool player agreed with me. You paid $500, you got $1,000 4 days later. There's nothing. Now, when I talked to you about it, Brian, you side with her. I shouldn't have sold it.
More of a collector or sentimental type?
Yeah, but I didn't have an income.
Yeah.
That was extra $500.
Grab an extra
And
$500.
you know what? I'll sell it again
Well, at least
today.
you went ahead and reordered it, though, right?
I haven't done it yet.
So I heard that you guys were very accommodating over at Chicago Billiards, that when you had people coming in to play, you do what you can to help them get into action with you.
Well, that was a tough pool room. You had 6 or 8 really good pool players hanging around. You had the owner had bags of money behind the counter, and all these guys were treacherous. Most treacherous that I can remember was Cripple Terry. He was in a wheelchair, and a couple years later he got out of the wheelchair. But he was in the wheelchair and he liked to gamble. So Chicago Billiards didn't have an access for handicap. I don't know how they got away without zoning. So Terry would get there. We would get downstairs at one particular time. We all carried a wheelchair up the stairs with Cripple Terry and the thing. And then Ginky's up there, and we kind of pushed the chair towards Ginky. And Ginky busted him. That was terrible now that I think about it. But it was a tough room.
I have to say, on the other side of it, I think that was very forward-thinking of you guys, that you weren't discriminating the fact that he was handicapped. You weren't going to let that stop him from enjoying himself. Good on you guys.
Thank you. Another one with Cripple Terry. He somehow worked his way out of the wheelchair, where he could walk around. He had a cane he used sometimes, but not always. I was down in Baltimore, which was the best room in the 80s. It was just great down there. So this would be the 90s now, maybe even 2000. He shows up down in Baltimore, and I've been hanging around down there off and on, for a couple of months. So I said, well, we can make money with this guy because he really is a good player, and he can barely walk. He falls down about once an hour. So I put him in a spot where everybody's gambling. I said, Terry, I know this sounds terrible. I said, walk in there, get a table, grab a house cue, and when you're walking to the table, fall down, break the house cue in half. I'll pay for it. Then you get up, start apologizing, and pull out, and I gave him a wad of money. I said, pull out all this money and apologize, say, I want to pay for the cue. I came down here to play. They're going to jump. He said, Bobby, gentlemen don't do that. I said, we aren't gentlemen. We're not gentlemen. He wouldn't do it. In a spot where there's so much money to be won, a guy comes in and falls down and he's crippled, everyone's going to play him. He died. No.
So you had a lot of good success down in the Carolinas, and I know you'd mentioned to me some of it had to do with the time of year and the crops and so forth. Can you explain what that was about?
When the tobacco would come in, you could go every little town, and I'm thinking of a particular place, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I spent a lot of time. I spent 4 or 5 months in Greensboro. But Winston-Salem, you had all the tobacco guys. You'd have guys showing up in the pool room in coveralls with $30,000 in cash. I mean, and they were all gambling back then. Most pool rooms in the South would have a special table would say open above the table. If you were in a game and it was an open table and somebody else wants to get in, you had to let them in the game. That's just, you could quit the game yourself, but you couldn't bar anybody. So we would get down there and hang around, and it was free money. It was so easy, but there was so much of it around, you know. That tobacco money was a lot. It was just a great time. And you know, when I went, first time I made any money was with real money with Eddie O'Connell. We went down to North Carolina. We won about $17,000, which was a lot of money in 1978, I think, or 7. When I came home, bought a Jaguar. 6 months later, I was broke, and when you know, somebody stole the car. Thankfully, I got a check. I went back to North Carolina. Of course, you can only have a car stolen once. You know.
So you were just like Toby Sweet for a minute there,
Yeah, but
with your Jaguar.
Oh yeah, that's probably why I did it.
Yeah.
That's probably why I still like 4 ebony points and a steel joint, because that's what Toby played with back then, and he made a big impression on my pool life. You know, he was a great player.
How old was Earl Strickland when you met him? You met him in Carolina, right?
Yeah, I met him and played him. He would have been about 16, I think, or 17. We were hanging around North Carolina. This is the trip when Eddie and I won 17,000. We heard about this kid out in the country, and it was the country, and it was a grocery store with a couple of pool tables, which wasn't an oddity back then. The pool tables were everywhere, in gas stations, everywhere you went through. So we'd heard about this young kid who was betting pretty good. He had some backers. So Eddie and I went, Eddie O'Connell, we went out to this town. It was called like Rosemont or Rosebud or Rose something, little town. And we pulled in, and it was 2 gas pumps out front. Then you walk in the door. To the left was a short order grill, which made great burgers. To the right were 2 pool tables. Meanwhile, the whole time I was in the Carolinas, I never played on a table I never heard the name of before. They didn't know what Brunswicks were. They played on crap. And then in the back was a grocery store. And here's this young kid running out. He played with a Mucci on the front table, just running out. So the people backing him knew we could play. So I gave Earl the last 2. And we were still playing push-out back then. And the only reason I could beat Earl, even at that point, I was probably 27 years old, 28, and I was playing pretty good. Earl would shoot anything. I could push behind 2 balls, and he might try a jump shot instead of saying shoot. So that's why he was beatable. He shot everything, and these were big pockets. And so that's when I met Earl. I saw him a couple of days later. He was in Raleigh looking. He wanted to know if he could run with Eddie and I, but we can't split the money too many ways. You know, you don't want another partner. So I kind of forgot about him. So now when I come home, it's 2 or 3 years later, my friend Bert was in Houston, and I fly down there to hang around. He told me he knew all the action. He knew nothing. So I had to find where the action was, and I'm hearing about this kid named Earl who's beaten everyone in the world. I didn't put it together. It was the same kid, but in the 2 or 3 years since I had met him and played him, he'd become a monster. And luckily, when I got to Houston, he was out of town, but he would have been 19 or 20, and he was beating pretty much everyone he played. He was one of the first guys with a big break too. He would shatter the racks. You know, now that's not a big deal, but that was a big deal back then.
Through our discussions, I found out that you and I had a friend in common. When I worked on Whaley Avenue, New Haven, I was across the street from the University restaurant, and the guys used to have me run over and grab the lunch. I was just a 22-year-old guy at the time, and met the guys in there, the LeCarry brothers. Found out much later they were connected guys. And he found out I liked to play pool, and he loved to play pool. And he asked me if I would come out with him, and we went a few times, and it was very enjoyable. And so turns out he was taking you around, and I think he figured out that you would be a pretty good horse for him, and he had some games with you. So tell us a little bit more about that, if you would.
Did you realize Paulie's Bar, where you went, it was called the University Bar and Grill. You know, when the New York Giants played the football, they used a Yale Bowl one year when their stadium was being built.
I remember that.
The front page of the New Haven Register said, New York Giants barred from Paul and Shorty's Bar and Grill for no mob connections or something. Well, if you went into Paulie's, which was a great spot, you walked in the front door, there were 2 payphones on your right. You couldn't use them because the bookies had them tied up all day. Heaven forbid you got to make a phone call. The room to the right had a card game. Upstairs was a pool table. The cook was from Italy, spoke no English, and he told me one time that was why she couldn't tell anything she overheard in the restaurant. I went in there as a young boy of like 22, 23. Now, Paulie liked me because he was a pool freak. He just loved pool. And it was obvious that I was going to be pretty good. So he would introduce me to all these. I met, gangsters. I met a bank robber one day, and I thought the guy was cool. He had a 3-piece suit on and slippers. But there was so much action in there. I mean, I was coming out of Guilford, Connecticut. This was a different world, and I loved it. I loved hanging around with these guys and going places. We'd sit in the pool at night, and he'd get a phone call. We had to all jump in his Monterey to fly Mercury Marquis. We had to fly down to New York to bet on some horse race. And I said to Paulie one time, well, what if the information you have is bad? And Paulie looked at me and says, he'll only do it once. And we knew right then, anytime we got these phone calls, we were all getting paid. And it was a great place to hang around in the early 70s. And on top of that, it was pool.
And the food was really good.
And the food was, yes.
It really was good.
It was great, and I didn't have to pay. I just loved it. I had a lot of fun in those eras.
Do you consider yourself to be a throwback player? I think after this conversation so far,
I think
we
so.
know the answer.
I liked the way pool was. We had rules that people don't have anymore.
Yeah.
Just little things. I don't see it. If you busted somebody, even if you didn't like them, you'd give them enough money to get home, or tank of gas, or if you won $1,000, you might throw them $50. Even if you didn't like them.
They
Back
would call
then,
that a walking stick.
yeah,
right?
you always gave them money, and also back in our time, you were always allowed one air barrel, only one, and you didn't necessarily have to straighten out. But a thing I see happen now, which drives me crazy, you can be gambling now with somebody, and somebody will come and try to steal your game while you're playing. That was unheard of in my era. If that had happened in the 70s and 80s, somebody was getting smacked with a cue. But I've had it just happen recently when you and I, when we were playing Tyler and he's trying to make a game with 2.0 while he and I are playing, and I laugh it off now, but that wasn't
Unacceptable.
that was you got punished for stuff like that. I learned all this stuff. I learned rules easy.
You were at Crown Billiards in New London when Mike Euphemia died.
Yes.
And that had to be, from what you've described, that had to be a one heck of a scene. Can you expand on that? What do you know
Yes.
about that?
Well, first of all, Mike Euphemia was a great straight pool player. I think he was out of the 40s, 50s, 60s. He was like Mosconi's age. He was a great straight pool player. Some of the old record books had him down having run over 600. And after he died, his name disappeared. But when Ice came up, he was known to have the high run in straight pool of 600 and something. And so Mike Euphemia is doing an exhibition in New London, and the room is packed. The way it was set up, I'm leaning against a table, but I had a direct view of the exhibition because it was like no one was in front of me. I'm standing with a guy named Terry Hogan, total degenerate of a human being. So we're watching the exhibition. We're only like 30, 40 feet away. So as it's early in the game, and Mike is playing a guy named Bob Haywood out of Connecticut. It's like the second or third rack in, Mike Euphemia was left-handed. And he took his cue, and he raked all the balls across the table, which my thought was, well, what are you doing? I didn't realize the man had a heart attack. So now he has a heart attack. He falls to the ground, and his head hit the ground, and it sounds like when you kick a football, that thud sound, really nasty sound. His wife is on top of him. They're trying to put, I assume, nitroglycerin in his mouth, and they're screaming, and someone yells, to the owner, Cy and Dolly, owned a beautiful pool room in New London. So they call 911. So they're doing all that. Well, the guy Terry Hogan, I'm standing next to. Now we just watched Mike Euphemia have a heart attack. We're 20 feet away. He walks up. We both walked over to see what's going on. He looked down at Mike Euphemia, and he says, "You want to play some now?" I said, "Oh God, this guy was cold-hearted. He was
brutal man.
I took him on the road one time. My God, he was brutal. He was a character."
So we're talking about Mike Euphemia, who probably had the high run in straight pool, and of course John Schmidt broke Willie's record. But there's an awful lot of controversy, as you're aware, over whether that really happened, whether the tape was spliced, the witnesses, all that. Meanwhile, our adopted Connecticutter by way of Scotland, my friend Jason Shaw, a couple of towns over, he just made a 7:14 a week and a half ago, and that's an amazing accomplishment. Congratulations, Jason. Do you think that'll ever get beaten, Bob?
Yes, I think Jason will do it if he wants to. I've never seen anybody pocket balls better than Jason. You know, in my generation, Earl Strickland pocketed balls tremendous. Wade Crane was as good as you could be, but I've never seen anybody better than Jason at pocketing balls. And the way the tables play nowadays, the balls break much easier than they used to, and you watch him do it. He flies through the racks. So I think if anyone breaks that record, it'll be Jason if he feels like it.
Part of the reason he's so enjoyable to watch, like Earl Strickland used to be, is he doesn't take any time.
Oh, he doesn't spend a lot of time.
There's nothing to think about, and he's not afraid to leave himself long.
No, he doesn't have any problem. Long, tough cuts, he just fires them in. I watched him play some one pocket last year, a couple of years ago in Derby City, and the guy he played outmoved him. Every ball was in front of his opponent's pocket. Jason's up the top of the table, and twice in a row, it was like a spot shot. He back cut it. Cue ball went 5 rails, went around the table, and got behind his balls, and he did it 2 back to back. I said, man, this guy is on a different level than the rest of us.
He's that guy that if you needed somebody to make a shot for your life, he would be the one you'd assign, probably, right?
Well, he'd be hard not to. Nick Varner was pretty good, too, in my time. He made more great comebacks, probably, than any pool player in history.
Bob, there was a lot of great players that came out of Connecticut. Wonder who you think, if I'm missing anybody on the list. We had Larry Liscotti. We had Champagne Eddie Kelly. Here's an interesting one. Donnie Edwards, a.k.a. the Water Dog. Herbie Lehman. You think who was the best of the group, you think?
I don't think you can judge generations. Equipment is so different nowadays than what we grew up on. You know, but certainly Larry has got to be one of the best ever. Ed Kelly maybe would be, more people would think he might be the best we've had come out of here. And certainly in my lifetime, it's been Larry. You know, no one's better than Liscotti. I'm trying to think. We had another great player, a top player, was Johnny Vivas out of New Haven, but he would have been at his best in the 50s and early 60s. In fact, he won the first one-pocket world tournament in Johnson City. I think that was around 1961. So he was awful good. I think, you know, like if you get back to Eddie Kelly and then Larry, they played every game at a top level.
So Bob, when you were in California in San Bernardino, you told me you had quite a lesson in humility. What happened?
Well, I was a young kid, and I was starting to play decent. I would have been about 15 or 16, but I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But I really thought I was a pool player. I played an older guy, and I beat him. And then I made jokes at his expense. He and his friend took me into the bathroom and stuck my head in the toilet and flushed it a few times. I learned humility that day. So to this day, I don't make jokes in front of someone I beat. I'll do it behind their back, but that was the day I learned humility.
What would you say is your proudest accomplishment in pool?
That I'm still here and I'm not broke. Yeah, that's pretty rare, you know. You know, as far as wins and losses, I can't think of one I was more excited winning than another.
Bob, do you have any regrets?
I've never regretted choosing to be a pool player. I've enjoyed almost every minute of it. The only bad time was when I got a job for a couple years, and thankfully I came to my senses and quit that. I regret now that it's over, almost over. I didn't play some more tournaments because, I have an ego like everybody, and I'm not as well known as others. And some of the people who were known better than me couldn't play me even. But I was always trying not to get the spotlight. That's just how I learned. We didn't want people to know how good we were. But now that I'm at the end, maybe now I wish more people knew I played pretty good when I was playing.
Well, I got to tell you, thanks to computers and Fargo ratings and all that kind of thing, I know you probably still don't have a Fargo rate, but your reputation precedes you. I know if we did a road trip, the guys would know who you are before you walked in the door. You're still not going to be able to get good action.
Well, I can't beat anybody now anyhow. But, as I've gotten older, I do regret, maybe I should have played more tournaments. But I don't regret playing pool, though. I loved it. I liked the idea. Didn't matter where I went in the country, I knew I wasn't going to lose. And I believed when I was at my best, the few people in the world that could beat me, I already knew who they were. Like Davenport, example. Except for, playing him, there was nobody else in Northern California I was worried about. That was a nice feeling to, now I'm not even the best player in Southington. So that's kind of hard to accept.
Well, so you got out there, you did what you loved. Basically, you made this your life's work. This is what you did for a living. And you had fun along the way, and you made some great memories. It's almost like cowboy romantic what you did. And a lot of guys wish they could trade places with you to have the memories that you do. Thanks for taking the time to share them with us. Really appreciate that.
I did tell my kids once on my tombstone, I wanted to put at the bottom, he had a good time on the bottom.
Very good. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.